good to see everyone this evening. Welcome. Let's begin. All right, so. Busy? Can I get you to take your jumper off because I'm going to do Kata Gatames and your hood's going to be in the way? My uke's ready. So we're going to start in the mount position today. And the mount is one of my absolute favorite positions now. But many years ago, I didn't really like the mount. I found it in no-gi really difficult to do anything. I didn't have a real idea on what to really do from here. It was like, you know, do I do an arm bar? Do I somehow force the back? I didn't really have a lot of good ways to do that. Guys would keep their elbows in, and in a fighting situation, it was great because you just sit here and punch someone. But in jiu-jitsu, it was a bit of a pain. And then now I've kind of worked out how to hold the mount. I've worked out the mount is such a dominating pin that if you do it well, that's really tiring for the man on bottom. I've worked out ways to obstruct his breathing and make life hell for him. Worked out ways to get elbows up to ears and isolate arms. And I want you guys to get to a point where mount is something you're trying to actively get to, because if you can get to the point where you're happy with your mount game, there's a lot of good stuff to be done here, all right? Rather than having to just fish for stuff from side control or, you know, sit back into leg attacks, for instance. So what we're gonna do here initially, and this is something that's becoming more and more popularized, is let's look at the idea of how does this whole smothering business work, where we take our chest and we put our chest over our partner's face and we use our chest to start to smother. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. Some people, Big Dan from New Wave, he's about 130 kilos. He's a big guy. He's like 6'9". How tall is he, Subbo? 6'7", 6'9"? He's a big guy. He gets mount on people, and I'm not convinced that he always actually suffocates them. He just like nearly pulls their head off their body. He puts a lot of pressure on the back of their neck and makes life absolutely miserable for them. That's one way you can do it. I'm trying to not do that with my training partner. I'm trying to basically push my chest to a point where it covers their nose and mouth. It doesn't always give you a tap, but it gives you big responses. It gets them to bring their arms up. So I want to show you guys the smother, and I want to show you why and when we would use it. Any time that he's got his hands down framing on your hips is a time you can consider using smothers. Now you got to think to yourself, well, if his hands are on my hips, I also need to be careful about him actually escaping from here, because this is good for him to escape from. Let's say he's just got cross frames in, he's just kind of been fairly defensive. I can come down here, and because he doesn't have any hands in front of his face, I put my elbows on top of his shoulders, I lift his chin up and I put a hand underneath his neck like so, and then I take my other hand, I just go elbow to elbow. And what I'm looking at trying to do is situate my chest so that I sort of find his nose and put it right between my pec muscles, and then I use like the center of my chest to start to catch his mouth. And then I'm going to try and just settle in and see whether I can just catch the front of his face. Now, right now, he's not puffing and breathing heavily because we haven't been in a jiu-jitsu match, but you take a guy down, you get into a passing battle, you get to here, his heart rate's up. That's when this can start to become a problem. He starts to get a bit panicked, and you can find sometimes these hands come off the hips and start to reach, and then you can isolate and start to get things out of it. So I don't always do it with the intention of actually achieving a tap. Often what I'm trying to do is just make him exhausted, and he's already tired, so I'm just helping him along. And then I'm looking for him to try and open up, come out of just throwing on my hips, start to maybe bring his hands up to try and defend, and then next thing I can find an elbow and start to go to work. So the idea with the smother is that yes, it's pretty cool if you can get a tap with it, but it's not really, it's fun to punk your training partners. But in reality, most of the time, it's just gonna work to make him tired, and then maybe get a hand to come up, and then you can start to look at isolating that elbow on the hand that comes up. So we're gonna get a training partner. He's gonna use cross frames on you here. Now you have to be careful. If he's a fucking good kipper, he starts kipping away, and the next thing you lose the whole position. So what I will say is, if I've got somebody who's very good at kipping, I don't rush forward to their head because I don't have any connection to his body. If I had an underhook, I can use smothers from here with the arm up. I feel pretty confident here because there's probably a handful of guys that can overhead kip with one arm well. But just be aware, if he's very good at kipping and you start to go to here, just be careful. If you feel that he starts to kip you, you need to start to settle everything down, wedge in next to his head, flatten his body out. What you can't do is just stay on the smother, and then you get put out here, and then you fall over on your side and you start to get knocked off the mount. Okay, so the smother should never really result in you getting knocked off the mount position. So we're going to come in here and you're just going to get used to finding the center of his chest. See how he's like, turn your head towards one direction for me. He starts to turn his head towards one direction. I like take my chest and turn it back into the center. So if his head's sort of off center, you might have to peel it and try and find, you'll get used to that sensitivity. I'm trying to get used to having him stuck right in the center of the chest here and then make his life hell. You'll start to get to panic bridges and panic and he starts to move and an elbow comes up and then we can start to isolate that elbow. So let's just look at the idea of how we'd use the smother and then we'll look at follow-up attacks from there. Let's give it a go. We'll start to get, if your partner knows you get to mount that you're going to threaten to disrupt his breathing with your chest, what you start to get is they start to not want to just double hip frame. Double hip framing is like really nice for escaping. So what he'll start to do is he'll either edge his bets with one hand high and one hand low, or some people will just have their hands at their face like they're hiding. And they do something like this so you can't physically smother them. But this is great. If he's doing this, you'll notice that his elbows are very available. UFC puts his hands up like this and keeps his elbows in as much as possible. There's nearly always a chance of you just reach down and expose the elbow. All right. So if he decides to do this, this is fantastic. So if you recognize the hands are in front of the face, don't just try and crush his face with his hands. It won't achieve much. Just take what he's given you. He's given you open elbows, and that's all we ever want, is a single chest wrap, generally followed by a double chest wrap. So when I started this out, I said, I used to not really have a lot of goals or understand how to achieve what I wanted from mount. My goal is always pretty much the same. I want to get him to a position like this. If I can get in a position like this is pretty cool too. Okay, so we just looked at the idea of using a smother or the threat of a smother to help us achieve that. His hands come up, elbows come off, and then we get up into this single chest wrap. So now we've got to a single chest wrap. Now there's no reason why we can't still threaten with a smother. It's much harder for him to kip now, so I feel more safe. The only thing I find that he can do is he looks into his own armpit and kind of tucks his face in there, and it can be hard to expose because when I try to get to the front of his face, his biceps kind of covering it. So I find that they can hide a little bit from here, but you can still fuck with their breathing. So what I'm going to do is reach for the base of his skull and just try to turn his head back to the center and then try to settle myself in where I start to get over the front of his mouth. And again, I'm not trying to like crush his nose through the back of his skull. You can do that if you like, but I'm just trying to cover his mouth and just see whether I can get some reactions here. See whether I can tire him out, see if he starts to panic, does he turn away, does he give me something? So now what we're going to do, your partner's going to do that game where they kind of bring their hands up towards their mouth a bit, so you'll find that you can't smother this guy. But what you can do is reach down and take an inside bicep on his elbow. He keeps nice and strong. And you're just going to lift with your underhook, put your hand on the mat, and you're going to start to just work this idea of levering his arm up. I walk, strong, 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 and then I lever. I walk, 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 and I lever. And I just start to keep going until I get his elbow right up near his head, and then I just grip up, back in very much in the same position we were just for the smother. And then I start to situate my chest over his face. Now, if his other hand is up here trying to stop the smother, I can even now exchange, where I go to a position here like so, and I know the other elbow's available, and I can put them both up. And if you can get them both up and his hands above his head, you can once again threaten smothers over the front of his mouth, and this is pretty hard for him to stop because his arms are occupied now. He thrashes around and bridges and does stuff, and now we can start to set up arm bars and triangles and a bunch of cool stuff. So we're going to get our partner, he's going to have his hands up here. We're going to use the exposed elbows to get to here. We're going to threaten smothers again. If his hand's still up, we're going to get him into double chest wraps. And we're going to threaten smothers again, and we're just going to keep harassing him, and then we'll go into some sort of real stuff after that. Let's go. Not that it doesn't work, it's just questionable. You're basically just taking your sweat-drenched rash guard and waterboarding your partner to some degree. But it's a very good tactic, it's within the rules, so go for it. Obviously, if I was in a fight with him, in like, say, if we think of our jiu-jitsu in a self-defense situation, I might be worried about somebody biting me, doing things like that, and losing a nipple. So if we're talking about that, I would probably not do that technique, but we're talking about jiu-jitsu, so it's totally cool. Now, we're going to work on probably my absolute favorite technique, which is the Kata Gatame from mount. So we're going to come in here and we're going to start to threaten smothers. He brings his hands up and we're going to bring an elbow out. We get to a single chest wrap. When I get to a single chest wrap, if I can convert where I take my chin and pass it across the body, across the elbow, sorry. So now his elbow's on the other side of my chin. I'm in a spot where I can start to Kata Gatame this guy. Now, it doesn't always come up like this. Sometimes he makes a big bridge because he just doesn't like this and his arm goes across and you pick this up. Sometimes you're in passing situations and he bridges in towards you and lets his arm go around the backside. Sometimes you're in half guard and he like bridges and turns over here and you can collect it, okay? So I want you just to identify what you're looking for, which is a crossface, and then his arm up next to his ear and the elbow past your chin. If you can get to that position, you're in a spot to Kata Gatame someone. And this is such a good technique, but it's surprising how difficult it is to teach people this. Because everyone has a habit of wanting to squeeze everything back towards themselves when they do this technique. And so what they end up doing is they squeeze the back of their partner's neck and they put pressure in the front of the neck and they don't get a good strangle. They just kind of crank their partner's neck, and when you go live with someone, they just don't tap. The second thing with this particular move is, if he's particularly skinny through the delts and the neck, it can be hard to do. So it's hard to do to girls, and it's hard to do with real skinny guys. He should be okay, but he's just on the borderline. But if you get someone who's very thin through there, they can actually be quite difficult to hit with this move. Not impossible, but just if you're wondering, if you think, fuck, I'm doing everything right, what's going on here? Sometimes there's just not enough mass to jam into the side of the neck. So let's have a look here. He'll be fine. He'll be a good candidate. We start to threaten a smother here. His elbows are in position where I can start to bring the arm up, and we get to the single chest wrap. From the single chest wrap, I take my chin and I take it just to the other side here, and I see that I'm having success. If he pulls that elbow back across, I just reboot and we keep fighting from here. As soon as I get to here, I bring my hand out and I C-grip the armpit. From the C-grip in the armpit, I take my head very low. What an important detail is that you don't just put his bicep anywhere on his skull. You put his bicep on his skull, there's sometimes a gap in here, which is where we're trying to close the artery. So what I try to do is I try to get his bicep more kind of down here, so it's nearly next to his nose and mouth, and you'll start to jam up. Where my fingers are now, there's no gap in there where I want to get to that artery. If I put him up here like this, there's kind of naturally a gap in here, and you end up finding you don't get a strangle. So if you're finding you're having trouble getting finishes, maybe you're getting the arm too high on the skull and you don't get closure down here. The more I start to put him to here, this is good. It doesn't have to be extreme like this. Here will be enough. Just like if you basically like go towards his own nose and mouth with his bicep, this is probably a good thing. So how are we going to do that? Well, we come in here, I C-grip the armpit and my head pummels down. And what I'm trying to do is turn my head till my ear kind of touches his ear. If my ear and his ear are touching, or our skulls are touching, generally his arm will probably be falling into that position we want. If I find that his bicep is blocking my skull from touching his, I'll have that gap in the side of the neck. So when I come around here, I take my head low and I scrape around and I touch the side of his ear. I've got my strangle palm down and I make sure that I've got no gap on this side of things. So I'm pushing in really tight against his neck, but I'm not flexing my bicep. So I come into here, everything comes down, palm goes up. So strangle palm down, secondary palm up, elbow wide. So when he makes a bridge towards me, my left elbow is a nice wide base. If my elbow's in against the rib line, he makes a bridge, you start to fall over. So elbows wide, and now I'm in a great spot to start to go. I don't rush to a dismount here, and I definitely don't come up into some type of tripod. You'll start to bleed pressure everywhere. So all I do, if I've got everything correct, is I just sag and I back heel into his hip and I let my head go against him. And from here I pull my elbow down into his shoulder and I put my head in and I just start to rotate. So the way I'm doing my pressure here is like this. So I'm effectively forcing this motion. His head's coming down into the side of my neck. So I'm taking him this way, I'm not pulling inwards. So often you won't even have to dismount into the side control. If I find I'm not getting the tap, I'm here, he hasn't tapped yet and I want to get a finish. I'm just going to pummel my foot and then I'm going to go completely flat. And from this position, I'm just going to relax and start to rotate my elbow down until we get a tap. Don't be impatient. Don't pull in the back of his neck. Don't come up into a high tripod. Just lay flat. If you've got it all correct, that should be enough eventually. Let's get a partner and have a play around with it. Let's go. Could strangle them with that technique. A spattering of hands. There's probably less that felt they could than couldn't. That's okay. That's why we're practicing. This is a really tricky move, and I find not as many people are as successful with it as they should be. If you get it right, this is one of the absolute best strangles, and I think one of the cleanest strangles you can get. So let's look at this. I don't want you, I'm gonna start from out here. I don't want you to be squeezing whatsoever. I want you to see whether you can get a tap by basically just laying here. So look, I'm turning my head into him. I'm not actually squeezing my right arm at all. All I'm doing is pushing. I'm pushing with my skull and turning him in here, which jams everything up. All right, so I'm not actually lighting up. If you were to watch, if I had no shirt on, which would probably be nice for some of you get to see that, it'd be something to aim towards. Oh, I didn't point at anyone in particular. The purpose behind that statement, other than to make people sad, is that you shouldn't see like my lat and my bicep lit up and squeezing as if I was flexing. I'm kind of laying on them and my head's doing a lot of the work. So see if you can make sense of that as I apply the strangle here. So look, I'm kind of laying on him at this stage. There's no, were you tapping? No. Oh. There's no light up of the strangle. I pummel off here and I go completely flat. I'm just laying on him here. Look what I'm going to do if I need to. I'm going to put my toes in the mat. I'm going to turn my head into him slightly. Again, I'm not lighting up my back. I'm not lighting up my bicep. I'm being relatively patient. Now, if you add the craziness of taking him down, passing his guard, mounting him, his heart rate's up, his body's asking for more oxygenated, red blood cells, all this is helping you with the strangle. So right now he's very relaxed. It takes a little more time to strangle him. But you get him completely harassed, you've smothered him, you made their life miserable, you won't need all that much here. So don't squeeze, just get everything correct and then nearly lay into the position and start to turn with your head. Let's give it another crack. Let's go. Okay. Well, that's good. We're getting nowhere. That's good. That's good to know. Okay, so let's look at another grip people like to use here. You go to most gyms, they'll probably teach you something like grabbing the bicep here. And you'll notice that I taught palm to palm. I think palm to palm, I can get a much better strangle with him than going to the bicep. I think as soon as you go to the bicep, this grip is really strong for locking in this hand, but it tends to be, I can't get that sideways compression, which is what I need here. I need this compression. And when I go to my bicep, it tends to be good for pulling this arm back, which just crushes the back of his neck. So a lot of people, you watch them apply this technique and their training partner complains that the back of their neck got strangled because it's just pulling in this direction. I think you're bleeding pressure in all the wrong spots. So when would we use that grip? The time I would use that grip is if he turns from being flat on his back to coming up on his side. Because now, when I try to use that palm to palm option, I don't have the mat to lay on and lean down on top of him. So from this situation is where I would start to switch from a palm to palm. I still get all the same mechanics as far as the hand positioning and my head positioning, but I go to my bicep, and then from my bicep, I lift my head up and I put my hand and I grab his tricep and I put my head back on top. So I end up in this position. Now from here, I can start to squeeze everything in for the finish. So a little bit like the same way we would finish a back strangle, where I start to rotate everything. You with us? You just look unconscious half the time anyway. So it's a slightly different mechanic. Instead of turning around the corner with the palm to palm, we're locking up here and then I'm trying to pull everything, the same compression sideways, but I've got a different way that I'm achieving it. Okay, so don't just pull into the back of his neck. Still make your focus, putting the V in the side of his neck and pulling everything in so the compression happens like this versus the compression going to the back of the neck. So those that are making sense, hopefully we can have a go at this. So you come down here to start to set up your Kata Gatame and he starts to make a turn because he's like, I know being flat there is going to be problematic. You keep everything nice and high. You go to your bicep and then from here, I make a small pummel with my head away and I grip as low down as I can on his tricep, down towards the side of his delt, like I was trying to push it into the side of the neck. And I put my head back in. And then from here, I start to pull everything in and I just have confidence in that squeeze till I get the finish. It will feel slightly different, maybe not as clean as the last strangle, but it should still be a strangle. If your partner feels something like this, where he just feels the back of his neck being torn up and the muscles just getting squashed but not actually strangled, have your partner tell you so you can adjust it. So the way it's going to work is, if I come in here and I feel that I could put him flat, I would just finish like so and just lay on him and go through a standard finish. But maybe I try to go here and he makes a big bridge onto his side and I feel I can't put him flat. Or maybe I just think, you know what, what we're calling this is, we refer to this as a side naked. Maybe this is just a better option. I'm going to go to the bicep. I come up here and I get to here. And then I just start to squeeze everything in until we get to the finish. If I start to put him flat and I can go back here, you can just go back into the finishing the strangle from this position. All right, so let's give it a go. That we call this a side naked strangle. Let's go. Maybe he just made a huge bridge, didn't like what was going on here, and I use that to make the transition to here. I start to feed everything in and I go into my side naked. Maybe you fuck up and he's super powerful and he makes a bridge and knocks you over to bottom position. And this starts to happen. Okay, you got to be careful here. If he can walk back over the top of you and get you guys chest to chest, can you do that please? And he ends up like this, what's going to happen is you're going to lose that ability to cause compression sideways, and you can squeeze all you like here, but you're pulling down into the back of his neck, into the back of his delt, and into the front of his jaw, and you're going to have a real hard time. I have a hard time finishing from here. So what we need to do is we need to be at that angle across the body one more time. So we either don't want this to happen, or if this does happen, we need to be able to take our grip. Even if you go back palm to palm, this is okay. And I use my hamstring to kick off him and turn me so I get back across him. Now I lock up back into the position now where I can start to pull everything in for my finish, versus if I'm under here, and you can practice this with each other, you can send it pretty hard from here. It hurts him, but it doesn't make him tap, particularly when we're going live. So let's just have a look how that'll look, because that's going to happen sometimes. You get bridged over. However this happens, because your elbow's quite deep around his neck here. So he comes up on his side, you switch into a side naked, but then he makes one more bridge and you get knocked over. If I can stay at this angle, that's what I want. So as he tries to square his chest up to me, I don't allow it and I go into my finish. If he does square his chest up and I'm like, fuck, this has not gone to plan. Don't burn your arms from here, just relax. Don't let him posture up. So at least keep either the bicep grip and relax it so you can spin, or you can go back to the palm to palm. It's up to you. Now I kick off him because there'll be tension in his body. He wants to stay on top. And I turn and I get back across him here. And now I lock up. And now I bring everything back into me for the finish. Let's give this a go. It'll be the last thing we do.